our board meeting today, May 14th. Appreciate Jerry and everyone is trying to make this all happen the way it is, and got a few changes that we're gonna try to do. Brittany, do you think we should talk about those voting changes when we get to item 3, or do you want to share with them what we're gonna try to do?
Do it now, if that's okay. Can you hear me, Chair?
Okay. Yeah. Can you go ahead and share what we want to do? You were breaking up on me and I couldn't hear. Sorry.
Okay. So thank you to all the board members who thank you all for taking the time to put your number in front of your name. We're going to try and use this tool a little bit more efficiently. This board meeting, experiment with it using the electronic voting. So what will happen is the chair will call for a vote, and then your if you see just at the bottom of your participant area, there's a green check mark or a red X. And so a green check mark would be a yes vote, a red X would be a no vote. And then you just have to clear that once the vote was taken. The chair will then call out the results of the vote by saying, it was unanimous, or if there was a few no's, he would name the no's, or a few yeses, he would name the yeses. That way the vote will be transparent for those listening and participating from the public. If you would like to quickly play with it, find your yes or no button and click it really quick. We can see that everyone has that option. Board Member Nielsen is joining us by phone, so the chair will call you out, Board Member Nielsen, specifically at the end of the vote, so you can give your yes or no vote. Are there any questions?
We'll give it a try, and
this is Jerry.
Patient.
Brittany, this is Carol. I can't see the yes, no buttons. Where did you
those who are on their iPad or Carol, they can only raise their hand. So maybe for a yes, they can just raise their hand.
On a video, I go to the video and then like raise my hand like that. Oh, or on the chat, place. No,
it wouldn't be in the chat box. But if you just raise your hand during the vote. So for example, if
on my video
Chairman calls for a vote, just raise your hand in that regular spot, and then we'll count that as a yes. And a no raised, if you don't raise your hand, we'll count that as a no. And we can clarify at the end when the vote's taken to make sure that your vote is recorded correctly.
Okay, I'm looking for there I am. Okay, so raise my hand.
Carol,
okay.
Raise your hand and let's just see if it pops up.
Yep, there. Does it work?
Okay.
That would be a yes vote.
That is the yes. A no vote, nothing at all?
Yeah, just leave it blank for a no vote.
There you go. That would be a no vote.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Huntsman?
Yes.
This board member Marsh, I'll be voting the same way because I'm on a phone and I don't have that option either. So mine will be a hand raise or a no hand raise.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, appreciate your patience, and we'll just get started. So thanks. Thanks you, Vice Chair Cummins, and we'll get through this, and it'll be a lot better than that long roll call vote. It appears that we've got every board member on, with board member Scott Nielsen also by phone. So, okay, let's get started. We've got a big day, big afternoon. I appreciate staff and everyone that's made this happen. Let's start off with the superintendent's report. Superintendent Dixon, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, I'll even let you see me. Hi, everybody.
Oh,
Good afternoon. It feels like it's already been a super long day. There's been a lot going on. I'll just start out. This is not part of the agenda, but wanted to make you all aware of the press conference that took place at 11 o'clock today, where Governor Herbert indicated that most places would be going to yellow, so that's low risk. The exceptions are Grand County, Summit County, Wasatch County, West Valley City, and Salt Lake City. Just looking at the chat boxes, there was confusion whether it was Salt Lake County or city, and it is within the city boundaries. My battery is dying apparently on my computer, so take care of that right away. Sorry about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Deborah in a minute here. That will save me being able to take care of my battery. But I want to start by just reviewing our timeline and our process for informing the budget proposals. We talked a little bit about it, and I shared a slide with you last month. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind bringing up slide 11, if you can, please. Okay, there it is. So I want to reference again where we're at in terms of the legislative dates. And we have been working as staff to really look at trying to carve out what some of these reductions might look like of 2%, 5%, and 10%. And I want to just give you just an overview of what that's been like. We've been meeting with our leadership council, and they've been diving in to try and think about things like what is essential.
I think we've lost you.
Chair Huntsman,
Yes.
I just got a text from Sid. She's asking if we could move forward to Deborah Jacobson, and she'll join back in a moment.
Okay. Deborah, are you ready to come online and do your part of your participation on the superintendent's report?
My part was actually item 8.
Okay.
Do we want to move to that one?
Well, she was alluding to something in her report that between the two of you, but
she was.
But
I can probably kind of expand on what she was starting to say here.
Because when we get to number 8, we're going to have quite a bit of dialogue.
Okay.
So
I think one of the things that she probably wanted to point out here is we've been working extensively with staff on what does 2%, 5%, and 10% cuts look like to their particular budgets. Being mindful that we want to identify things that are essential to education as a whole, things that are nice to haves, things that are helpful but not essential, and things that may be duplicated throughout the agency. So it's kind of the framework that we've been working with the staff in hopes of building a really good comprehensive tool for next week's board meeting for you to and to bring some really good, strong, solid recommendations that we will then take to PEA. So I'm not sure what else she wanted to cover here other than the timeline. EAC did meet yesterday. The PEA has officially been scheduled for May 27th at 8 a.m., which is where we'll present our the board's recommendations. And there still hasn't been a date officially scheduled for the special session. So we're still waiting on that. The one thing that I can say, which I hope she comes on soon because I don't know who's supposed to come after me.
I'm
is
on.
that
I'm
all
listening
of
to you.
Oh, she's there. Oh, good.
Keep going. Doing great.
Oh, okay. So the one thing that I will say is that our staff have absolutely been phenomenal in identifying some of these things, and these are such hard discussions to have all the way around. And so I'm actually very proud to work with this group of staff because it makes finance's job a whole lot easier. But it is very hard discussions to have with them. So, Superintendent, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I'm so sorry. Usually you get a warning. You've got feedback going on somewhere. Yes. Yeah, so usually you get a warning about your battery died and then you have a few minutes, and I think I had 10 seconds. So I thought it was plugged in and it was not. I apologize. I guess I would just ask Jeff, is there anything you want to add to what Deborah said that came out of executive appropriations yesterday? It was pretty general in nature, but is there anything, since you were tuning in and taking notes, that you want to add there?
Sure. Just very briefly, yesterday in EAC, the big thing that came out, is Deborah and I actually talked about this morning, is they authorized the appropriation subcommittees to begin looking at the respective budgets that they work with in looking at these potential cuts. They produced a list of all of the new money that was allocated in the 2020 general session and encouraged the appropriation subcommittees to begin with those lists when considering potential cuts, and then to discuss with their respective agencies if there's a swap out they might want to do. So sacrifice an existing program for one of the new funding allocations. So that came out, and I did want to clarify, if anyone was listening and they heard the statement at the end of Jonathan Bond's presentation, he made a comment about if you make $500 million one-time cuts and $700 million ongoing to general education, you will balance the budget. What he was meaning to say was general and education fund. So it was cuts from both funds, not just the education fund, but there was some confusion around if all those cuts were coming from the education fund, but it was on all their documents, it said general/education fund. So I just wanted to make sure it was clear that they're looking somewhere between the $600 million up to the $1.4 billion cut for this next fiscal year.
And I, just to follow up with that, thank you, Jeff, and appreciate you so much tuning in. I did get verification as I spoke with a couple of folks on the EAC, including leadership, that there's no intention at all to be thinking that the one-time CARES Act money could backfill or take the place of any state money, that they're dealing with those very separately and realize what the CARES Act money is for. So if, as Jeff mentioned, that was just sort of a brief comment, and I wanted to make sure anybody who's listening in understands that that is not the intention of EAC at all. Just one last thing to add to this, just a punctuation mark again on, we're working back and forth to try and make sure we have accurate information to bring before you next week on the 21st during board meeting, where we would expect you would take action then on recommendations that we would take the following week to public ed appropriations. So it'll be kind of a short turnaround time, but we're trying to do diligence so that we have some possibilities to lay out before you so that you can discuss and make recommendations, that then when we are in front of the Public Ed Appropriations Committee, that we are representing the will of the board. So hopefully that is helpful. I'm going to pause there about the timeline and process for informing budget proposals to make sure that we answer any questions or address any concerns that you might have.
Questions from board members?
There are no hands.
Okay, so I've kind of got one that might be might be relevant here, and this is again managing expectations. The 600 million to 1.4, that spread's pretty significant. As superintendent, has anyone said anything to you about when, or do they, or approximately when they think that they will have some better numbers to tighten up exactly what we have to work with, or are we going to be working with this significant spread?
I think for now, we're definitely working with a spread, which is why they're asking for several scenarios. I have heard anywhere from, it could be the last week in May to the second week in June before they even have the revenue numbers. I don't know if anybody on the call has anything differently, but that's what we've been told and what I've heard. Deborah or Jeff, have you heard anything different than that?
They anticipate that they'll have, so the forecasting that they're doing right now are all preliminaries, and they'll be following that over the next couple of weeks, hoping that by the special session, they will actually have a solid estimate that we will actually budget to. But we won't have that until the special session.
So a follow-up to this is so that we will budget to. So we're going to do this due diligence, and then during their special session, do you feel like we'll still have an opportunity to weigh in? Once that session starts, because usually public ed approach does their due diligence, and then if they pass it up, and then there's a process, and then we're kind of out of the process after public ed approach, which will be, didn't you say the 27th?
Yes.
So
I really think that we'll be in very close contact with the LFA during that time, after public ed approach. And there will be a lot of dialogue during that time that we'll be passing through, obviously, back to the board to help make informed decisions on where we go from there.
okay, thank you. Is there any other questions on this particular, on the schedule and
Board Member Earl?
Board Member Earl?
Sorry, I have my anyways, my mouse is hovering over that, but I didn't realize I actually pushed it. I did have just one simple question, and maybe it's just a clarifying question, and it could be answered in their documents. And I apologize, I should have looked this up, but they had indicated to go back to a certain date to look at the numbers that were recommended at that date or that appropriations. I'm just trying to recall exactly what that was. And they said it would have been prior to the 6% recommended increase. Can someone refer to that? And then I would know where to locate that at.
Board Member Earl, I'm a little unclear what you're asking. Are you asking about the House Joint Resolution 301 and what the numbers were for the base budget plus growth? Is that what you're referring back to?
Well, during yesterday's meeting, and I caught bits and pieces of it as much as I could, but they just had referenced, and maybe it is specifically the base budget in that particular bill. Is that what they referenced? Is that where to look for those base budget numbers?
I believe so. Jeff,
Yes.
you can correct me if I'm wrong. That's it, right?
So
Sounds like the answer is yes, the base budget.
Yes.
Of the what number? It was at 3001. Is that the bill?
No, it was 301, House Joint
301.
Resolution. 301.
Okay, that just gives me where to do that research. I apologize. I didn't catch where exactly that was located. I just heard bits and pieces. So thank you.
okay, thank you. Any other questions, Brittany?
Board Member Cannon?
Board Member Cannon?
I would just like to ask if the superintendent might give us a little more information on money that will be coming to Utah from the CARES Act and how we can use that money effectively and how far that might go to help us during the pandemic.
Sure, that's our next agenda item. I do feel like I need to go back though and clarify. I think I got cut off when I was talking about the governor's conference a little bit. Everybody feel like they have what they need on that? Or I can end with it. Why don't we just move to CARES Act and then I can clean up anything that we need to on what was said on the press conference this morning. This is the slide I shared with you last week at board meeting where we talked about the CARES Act funding with both ESSER, which comes to us, and then the GEARS funding to the governor. So this is our total amount that you can see, almost 68 million coming to us, and 90% of that goes directly out to them. So to answer the question that board member Cannon asked, which is a great one, it's will it really cover what we need? And you might recall that we shared with you survey results, and I sent you all out the more extended survey that you could drill down a little bit more. And you might have noticed that according to what people think they might need, we're almost like 20 million or $21 million short of what people are saying they might need to make up for some of the unfinished learning, replacement of technology, just maintenance of effort, all those kinds of things that they're working on. So it's a great question to say, how much more will we need? But we don't know that based on the budget cuts that we have. And again, this is one-time money, just trying to bridge some of the learning. So we're looking at budget cuts to ongoing programs, and we've been saying that we want that to be in the frame of a one-time budget cut, even though it's looking at ongoing money. And then CARES Act trying to mitigate some of these other issues. So there's a gap there in between, to your point, board member Cannon, that we just don't know where the gaps will be in funding for the next couple of years. So it's an important question. I wish we had a concrete answer. We just know what we're estimating from our LEAs, saying that they think they will definitely need a lot more. There has been a request for some additional funding coming out of congressional packages. You might see that there was a package that the House Democrats requested that would bring more money into schools, but we don't know what that will look like until we hear more from congressional acts that actually pass some additional money and what our budget cuts are. That's probably not too helpful. Sorry about that.
Other questions? We're talking about the CARES Act funding. Other questions or comments from board members?
Board member Lear.
I wanted to go back. If you called on me, Brittany, but Mark did not yet.
Board member Lear, both of them called your name. I think one may just
Board member Lear.
cut the other one out.
Yes, I'm here. My question is back to the budget item. Can I go back to that, or do you want to wait for a few minutes and discuss the?
And we're still going to get onto that in item 8 at the end.
Well,
but unless
I just want to
see if there's any questions on the CARES Act funding, and then we'll move on.
All right, just so we get back to the budget.
Okay. Is there any other questions on the CARES Act funding?
Well, I do want to add a little bit of context, if I may, to the CARES Act. I want to talk a little bit more about just some of the additional factors that we're looking at. So really, again, we're loading budgets, thinking about how we're tracking this, where other states have to come up with some processes. We are actually loading ours into the grants management system. Remember that we applied for the funding and we've been approved. So as soon as we get the money, we load it up into grants management. And then Sarah Young is our lead, along with Rebecca Donaldson. They will be putting expectations out to the field about how to upload, basically, I call it an application, but uploading correct information, and then how to seek reimbursement. And they can seek reimbursement for expenses incurred at the point in time where President Trump declared the declaration of a national emergency, which is March 13th. So we now are in the process of considering what do we do with that 10% set aside that comes to us. And we're consulting with the governor's office on gears. We mentioned this briefly to you last week, but I want Jill to take some time, if I may, and then Sarah to weigh in as well about anything I've missed on the process. But I want Jill to weigh in because we've done this amazing factor analysis, and by we, I mean Jill, in terms of really looking at a different way of thinking about funding. We have the EARS funding that the governor is very interested in. He's always wanted to make sure that we're taking care of the most vulnerable populations amongst our student body. And so that's one way of looking at it. But Jill has done an additional analysis that we've asked her to share with you. I think she's on.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Jill, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Yeah. Jill Curry, Program Analyst at the State Board of Education. Jeff, could you pull up the backup document for this for me?
Jeff, it should be in my report. You were headed in the right place.
I wanted to say warmer, hotter, colder.
We're getting close, I think. Okay.
In the slide presentation?
What?
Was it in the slide presentation or the board agenda?
No, it was posted under the superintendent's report. I don't know why it's not coming up.
It's not showing up. Go ahead and start and I'll try and find it in a different spot.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe it got posted a little bit later than when you pulled this document. Okay. So as Superintendent Dixon stated, what I'm going to cover right now are just some of the things that we're taking into consideration for the 10% set aside from ESSER. And then we're also using these data to inform the governor's office on their decision-making for the GEAR funding. So kind of the task that I was given was to try to identify our hardest hit LEAs. So the methodology that I used is modeled after that used for the Rethink K-12 education grants to determine coronavirus burden by state. There are 4 indicators that I used, and once we get the sheet pulled up, I can talk you through those. Each of the indicators is worth 25 points, so they're weighted equally. And then 3 of the 4 indicators were available by county. So what you're going to see in the document are actually the counties hardest hit by COVID-19. So I'll start to talk about the indicators and then hopefully we can get the document soon. Okay, yeah, perfect. So you can see in that first column next to county, that's our first indicator. So it's the percent of the March labor force filing unemployment claims. So for this figure, I took the number of unemployment claims from March 15th to April 25th, which even as of this week is still the most up-to-date information that we have, and divided that by the March labor force as an economic indicator of how COVID-19 has hit our counties variably. The second indicator is the percent of households without broadband internet subscription. These data were pulled from the U.S. Census American Community Survey 5-year estimates from 2018. The third indicator is the percent of children in poverty. So this is an estimate of the percentage of children ages 5 to 17 in families in poverty in each county in 2018. Divided by the total number of children in those counties in 2018. And so this figure comes from US Census estimates, and then also county projections from the Gardner Policy Institute. And then the fourth indicator is the percent of total COVID-19 cases. So for this, I took the percent of COVID-19 cases in each local health district. Some of our local health districts, as you know, include multiple counties. So in these instances, the percentage for the health district was used for all of the counties within that district. And this, these calculations are up to date as of May 12th. So I went back through and redid the calculations then. So let me walk through then how I came up with the total burden score and then the rank and the percentile. So for each indicator, yes.
If I could just ask you to pause for a minute. So
okay,
look at the percentage of the total of the COVID-19 cases. It could be a little bit confusing because what we heard today, those counties that are going to stay orange, that are not going to yellow, are again Grand, Summit, Wasatch, West Valley, and Salt Lake City. And so when you look at Salt Lake County, for example, West Valley City and Salt Lake City, both are in that county. But if you look at Grand and you see that, wow, that's only 0.2%, that doesn't seem like a lot of the overall total. They factor in moving from orange to yellow a number of things. They look at the pockets of spread. They look at the 1-to-1 ratio of I'm having a hard time. Communicable disease spread ratio. So does one person give it to 1 or does one spread it to 5? They look at all sorts of factors. And so it's important to note that what you see in that column doesn't translate directly to moving from orange to yellow, as you heard today. I just wanted to point that out. Sorry, Jill.
Okay, no, that's great. Okay, so to calculate the total burden for each indicator, the county with the highest percentage gets 25 points. So they receive the full point value. All other counties receive a portion of 25 points based on the percentage of their burden relative to that county with the highest burden for that indicator. And Jeff, if you could go to the bottom of the last page, I'll kind of walk you through what that calculation looks like. Here you can see an example I pulled. So Grand County has the highest burden for unemployment claims at 21.11%. So it receives the full 25 points. Next you can see is Summit County at 17.72%, which is about 84% of that 21.11%. Thus, Summit County receives about 84% of the 25 points, which is about 21 points. So points for each of the indicators were calculated in this manner and then added up into a total burden score. And Jeff, you could probably go back up to the top. Then the counties were ranked with a larger number indicating a higher burden. So you can see them ordered in the document from the county estimated to have the highest burden down to the county estimated to have the lowest burden. Then I use those rankings to determine percentile categories for each county. So a couple of points that I want to make kind of going through this type of calculation is that one big assumption in calculating this by county is our big assumption underlying this is that LEAs within a county were similarly affected. So I think if this methodology is used to kind of inform maybe how we're distributing the SEA set aside of CARES, then I think we just need to recognize that that is kind of an assumption underlying this methodology. And then the second point that I like to make with this is that it is likely we're going to need sort of an additional layer to actually distribute the funds. And so, for example, even though Canyon Rim Academy and Salt Lake School District are both in Salt Lake County, we would probably not distribute the exact same dollar amount of funds to both just because their sizes are so different. So I imagine if we use kind of counties hardest hit as a factor in terms of distributing funds, that there will be other factors that help us land on appropriate dollar amounts for LEAs. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or feedback.
So again, board members, this is just to think about an additional way for us to look at how we use that 10% set aside. And that doesn't mean that we'll necessarily distribute all of that. For example, Betty Sue Hinkson, working with our school nurses, as I've mentioned before, we looked at current health kits, including thermometers. And so that might be a worthy investment for us to try and buy in bulk up-to-date thermometers to distribute to schools, or through a supply chain trying to get personal protective equipment to put in health kits. And that includes if we have students who come to school that have contracted the virus, whether they are symptomatic or asymptomatic, and somebody is caring for them in a separate room, they might need a face shield, an appropriate mask, and protective gear. And right now, we don't have that in most of our schools. So those are things that perhaps we can save schools money by purchasing that out of that 10% set aside. But this exercise, to us, was really important, and thinking beyond just a typical way of a funding formula, but how can we target those funds to where the county or the city might even be, the county or the school district rather, might even be more impacted.
Is there questions from board members up on this presentation?
Yes, we have some hands raised. Board Member Davis is next.
And Board Member Davis?
Yes, just as we think about that 10 million, I have had a constituent reach out and ask if we had any funds to purchase hand sanitizer in bulk for when students go back to school. I don't know if that would be considered in the same category with the thermometers, your discussions with the school nurses, but I just want to put that out there. And then I also had a question about your earlier presentation about Governor Herbert's announcement. Should I wait and ask that at the end or ask now?
If we could just finish up with CARES Act, and then I'll go back and we'll talk about what yellow means.
So we're on CARES Act, and then we're also going back to budget for Board Member Lear.
Okay.
So
Okay, next is Board Member Earl.
Board Member Earl.
Oh, sorry, she took her hand down. So Board Member Hanson.
Yeah, Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. Just had a question about the methodology on the chart. I noticed we have the percent of total COVID-19 cases, and I'm assuming from the explanation, Jill, that that's the percent in the county of the whole state's number of COVID-19 cases. Is that right?
That is the percent by local health district. So for some of the counties, they're going to have the same. Yeah, there's some double counting of percentages, so those will not equal 100%.
When I was looking at the ranking chart that the feds put together for the Education Stabilization Fund stuff, they used a per capita number there, and I was thinking that might be maybe more representative of what's going on in the counties, because some of these counties are very low population and the numbers would change significantly if you did that. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, no, as I'm like, because I thought that might come up in terms of like what the feds had used. And so I had actually written that down, but I think you're right. As I go through and rework it, I'll do it by per capita and see how that kind of changes where things fall.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for the hard work. It's hard to put all this stuff. We're playing with a lot of variables. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Board Member Thorpe, your hand's up on this. Hanson, I think your hand's coming down.
Yeah, mine is just a comment. I just wanted to express my appreciation for this thoughtful analysis. And it's such an interesting thing that we need to think about in a different way than we've ever allocated funding before. So this is a really thoughtful approach, and I appreciate staff for undertaking this and presenting this to us. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Earl, are you wanting to speak to the?
Yes.
Okay.
I just have just a couple questions. So, for example, Salt Lake County, would our focus, and I think you indicated this, but our focus might be in certain areas in those counties. And then just help me understand again, will these individual areas apply for grants through us for that 10%, and we will base it on their needs, or will we make recommendations as to where that funding will go? For example, we've already given several recommendations as far as possibly thermometers that could, especially those impacted areas, but could actually benefit a larger area of the state as far as overall needs. So that wouldn't necessarily be an individual application, but what are we seeing moving forward on that?
I think those are some decision points, Board Member Earl, that we're going to want to bring to you as a board. So right now we're trying to look at a variety of ways to inform the GEAR funding from the governor's office, as well as are there some different ways we can think about how to use our 10% instead of just a typical, either a competitive grant or a qualifying grant. Sarah can maybe talk about the way forward, but we're in the middle of that process right now so that we can gather a variety of ideas and again, present them to you like we normally would, and then have you approve the way forward of schools accessing the money.
Superintendent, I've got a question because some people have talked about thermometers and hand sanitizer and these. I'm sure they're going to be talking about masks in our dialogue with the governor's office and with this funding. The more we talk about it, and the more we strategize and prioritize, there's got to be a lag effect on purchasing. I know that you spend a lot of time on task force and you hear a lot of things that is happening there. There's an anticipation or that school will be starting this fall, which is only a few months away. Has anybody, and this is a question about materials, but has to do with I think with some of this funding. Has anyone at the governor's office or to the health department looked far enough ahead to see what's happening on the supply side to have those assurances that if we go through this grant application and we're funding thermometers or hand sanitizer, whatever it is, that there's enough time to jump through all the hoops of procurement and be in a position that we have these, I call them lines of defense, ready for the school year?
That's a great question. I was actually in a conversation yesterday with members of the task force where we talked about this very thing. Now, just a reminder that the 90% that just goes out by formula to the schools, they can make these purchases on their own. There's nothing to prevent that. But to your point, Chair Huntsman, we want to make sure that there is an easier way for them to do that and a fair purchase price, et cetera. So as part of the overall emergency management structure, there is a committee that works on nothing but personal protective equipment. And they've established those supply chains and the procurement process to acquire that. And so I would go into that queue, or somebody on our behalf would go into that queue to place an order. And we're in that exploratory phase where we're trying to determine how much we would need, what the possibilities are. But that would be the best way forward because they are the ones that have established those. Imagine every school or district trying to do that on their own. It could be very challenging. So all of that is in place for sure. And it's just a matter of us saying this is exactly how much we will need for the coming year.
So I'm reverse engineering some of the, I guess, the LEA's needs a little bit. And so within that group that you're talking to, I'm sure they probably have good data to say, yeah, it's 30 days, 14 days, 45 days out. So the LEAs can make as soon as we do our work on this end, and they're scrambling right now, and as you know, of trying to figure out budgets and budget priority. What do I give? What's the health department going to require me to have? How much am I going to need? And there's just a few there, but as we talk about with the CARES Act and moving that forward, I appreciate the update on the materials on the material side. So it seems like you've got a handle on it, and we'll be able to pass that on to the LEA. So thank you. Any other questions on the CARES piece? I see Board Member Newell.
Yes, I just wanted to thank everybody for the hard work they put in on putting this data together. I'm really interested also in how, or if there will be able to be a comparison of this portion of the funding and also the governor's portion, the gear sys portion. And if we can get a comparison of those two together to kind of see where those funds funnel down to, so that we can get a better idea of exactly where those funds are going, who they're impacting. You know, especially when I look at these numbers of the children in poverty based on these counties that are most highly impacted percentage-wise, it would just be really interesting to see that data, to be able to help us understand that a little bit more and to be able to discuss that clearly with our constituents.
It's a great question. So the GEAR Act, I apologize, Chair Huntsman, I just jumped right in.
Oh, you're good. Go ahead.
The GEARS Act calls for consultation with the state agency, and they have been great to have us at the table to consult. As they then apply for the funding, which they're getting ready to do, they haven't applied for yet, that comparative analysis that you're asking for is really more working together and trying to fill in the gaps. So we would not want to be duplicative, but really working hand in hand with both of those formulas going out. Deborah Jacobson has been at the table, I know, working with Jacob in the governor's office, and a number of our staff have been in contact with them. As Sarah, why don't you go ahead and just share in case somebody can't see the chat. I think she's got additional information. Sarah Young.
Thank you. So Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. Just to support what Superintendent Dixon has said, we have weekly meetings for coordination with the governor's education staff. So as we're taking steps forward, we're really looking to do that to have coherence and yet make sure we're not being duplicative in any areas.
Superintendent, I've got some other hands up. Board Member Cannon, did you have a question on this funding?
Super. Am I okay to go ahead?
Go ahead.
As I heard Superintendent Dixon talking about the possibility of providing thermometers for every school, I thought, what a good idea. And then it popped into my head that Utah has an extremely low percentage of school nurses, and each school nurse we do have oversees thousands of students. And I'm wondering if going through this pandemic scenario has highlighted a need for more school nurses in our schools, and just wondering if there are any thoughts towards opening up and seeing if there's any way to provide more school nurses or lowering that ratio of students to school nurses.
Superintendent?
That is such a brilliant question. Thank you, Board Member Cannon. It's something that we have been discussing with our wonderful Betty Sue Hinkson. Betty Sue Hinkson, as you know, has always been an advocate for more school nurses. And the the guidelines were changed in our student mental health bill from Representative Ellison to allow for funding additional school nurses. So you could spend some of that money there. And I know we've added some, but we do not have one per school and caseloads are very high. So this is a question more than an answer, but, or a concern rather, built into a question. It's really about training. So if we don't have nurses in schools, it's kind of been a typical thing for the school secretary to put a Band-Aid on or get an ice pack or playground duty. You know, everybody does those things. But now this has become much more serious. So who do we train on some of these protocols for taking temperature, et cetera? And that's a big concern that many of our teachers have expressed. Do they now also become a nurse doing this kind of work, or is it front office? So that's a big hurdle that we have to overcome and talk about. Can the CARES Act money pay for health and safety? Yes, but again, this is short-term one-time money. So I think the interaction that we have with the local health departments and our local medical providers is going to be very critical, not only in training in our school for some of these protocols, but also the way forward to make sure that we're not putting burdens on our teachers and office staff around issues of health.
There are a few other hands, but we're still on this subject. I think they're still up. Well, I didn't see them come down. Sean, let's see. Board Member Earl. For Board Member Earl, Hanson, and Newell. So.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay, so I have just a couple more questions or comments. One of those was I do know that we did open up that funding for safety for school nurses to be, but that to apply for more school nurses, and I know that that was addressed. I just have a question with the relationship between this funding that we are receiving and also the non-public schools. How I know that there is requirements within the certification and agreement application that we address that as well. Can you just talk about how we're making sure that the emergency needs of all education entities are being met?
Yeah, so in the law, there is a provision, much like there is in Title I for, it's an equitable provision to ensure that students who are in non-public schools who qualify for Title I funding can receive services. There is a question in the federal law right now about what that means. The way it's currently written, it can be interpreted that they would receive more money than other schools, or more money than they have in the past in a percentage. So states are actually interpreting that a little bit differently, state to state, and we're trying to get some guidance from the federal government about that. Sarah, do you want to expand on that at all, or Patty?
Sarah or Patty?
Thank you. So Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. I just included this in the chat. USBE staff member Val Murdoch has developed a survey that will go out to the field this Friday, specifically to our district leaders, that will help us gather additional information about the private schools that are interested in collaborating with their local LEA, as well as their enrollment numbers, which will help us better address that question. So we're taking steps to gather data so that we can act as soon as we have that clarifying guidance.
Board Member Hanson, did you have another question?
I did, thank you. When we're talking about distributing this money and using it for various things, thermometers, sanitizer, and that sort of thing, I was wondering where we are with regard to the requirements for the schools as far as what they're going to need to do to reopen in the fall, hopefully. With regard to, are we going to take temperatures of each student? Are we going to have hand sanitizer in certain areas? Or the school's going to have to be sanitized every night? I know for businesses, those guidelines have been defined, but do the schools have a list of requirements? And is that going to be developed on a state level, or is that something the local health departments are going to put together?
Superintendent?
Yeah, that was part of the next part of the discussion, but I can lean into that. And I want to just say I threw out the thermometers and PPE or personal protective equipment as an example of what we might use money on. But again, that decision has not been made. It's something that you as a board will make as we bring our recommendations to you for that 10%. So just want to be clear about these are all things we're exploring and trying to get pricing on and see if that's something that our LEAs would want us to use our money on. But having said that, the protocols that came through Utah Leads, as you might recall, just had schools open or closed. And we have been looking at documents from a variety of sources, the CDC, and I could go on a list of about 10 resources. So all of the states have been working together to look at various guidelines for safety. We have been developing a document that we've been working on it closely with Utah Leads the last 48 hours, trying to determine what would be helpful for them to put in their guidelines, meaning that they're working with state health and local health authorities. And then we've been working with those same groups. So trying to get everyone on the same page of what does it look like in a school if we are in yellow? What does it look like if we're in orange and allowing some kiddos to come back? And then once we get back to green or normal risk, what does that mean in terms of scaled up sanitation? So all of those things we're trying to get as precise as we can. And we know that context by context will vary. The main thing that we want to impress on everyone is that schools continue to work with their local health departments. They meet almost daily. They're in sync and really trying to put all these same guidelines together from CDC and other places that they're getting their information with best practices. We believe it will be very helpful to schools if we can give them specific health guidance, but that really does come from the health department. And then we take that information and put a practical lens to it, and we'll put that in a document. Is that what you were asking, Board Member Hanson? Does that help?
That's helpful. I know it's difficult to put out some kind of a statewide guideline, and I understand the health departments have to be in sync, but I'm glad that we're taking the initiative to at least put forth best practices or try to consolidate that into a workable documents. So thank you.
Board Member Davis.
Yeah, I was just reading in the governor's website. There are 4 guidelines already there, but I'd like to quickly read those and then ask Superintendent if the first one is actually follows code. Anyway, the first one says, under this yellow, which many of our areas are now, it says schools may open under the direction of the Utah State Board of Education, but follow distancing guidelines with increased cleaning and hygiene regimen. Second, increased cleaning and hygiene regimen. Third, all symptomatic children should stay home from school and will be sent home if exhibiting symptoms. 4, limit child interaction with other children in public spaces like the playground, and a 6-foot distance should be maintained. So those, am I correct in understanding that that is protocol right now for a yellow? And is it really true that we could open doors tomorrow and that would be up to us and not up to the health department? Also, in another section, it says that you can have gatherings over 50 if they are overseen by a formal organization, I'm assuming such as a school. So that would have allowed graduations and such. But my biggest question is to Superintendent, is that really true, what it's saying on their website, that we have that jurisdiction to open?
But that is news to me. So we've been working with them on an updated document, and I have not seen the updated document. That does not sound like the last one that I saw, but that jurisdiction given to the board, that is something new that nobody has expressed to me, at least in any meeting that I've been in. So I would have to see what you're looking at and where it came from.
I'll send that link to you. Is
it the Utah Leads document that you're looking at, or another website?
It's on the coronavirusutah.gov. It's on the one that they typically refer to, but I can send that out.
That's a
if
PDF
that is-
that says moving to yellow.
What's that?
I'm sorry. The PDF's just titled moving to yellow, and then talks about all the requirements.
And so we'll take a look at it. That the part about the state board, like I say, that's something new that nobody has expressed before. So it's just a bit of a surprise. I can't respond because it's something I haven't heard of.
And just to follow up, if that is not statutorily accurate, can someone who meets with them make it accurate? Because we're getting lots of emails and I'm telling everyone that that's not our jurisdiction.
Yeah, but when I get off this, in fact, I'll text somebody when it's not my turn anymore and I'll find out. I'm actually scheduled to be on a call with local health authorities at 3 as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Earl, did you have another?
Yeah, I did have just a question. So as far as the dialogue with local health departments, how does the state board actually carry on dialogue to be part of what's going on there? That's a question, but it does lend itself to what was just read by Cindy, that there is a point where you're putting back into the hands, right, the decisions of local governments, or in this case, state governments that oversee entities, for example, education. That would be the State Board of Education as we move to those lower levels, that other entities would take back that power that was given to either the governor or the health department. So it would seem like that would be a natural progression as we move down that scale. So the original question is how do we participate in that dialogue as board members? And then just the comment.
Superintendent?
So I'm actually not, that sounded more commentary than a question. I guess the question, if your question is how do you engage in dialogue, I would say as individual board members, you could talk to your local health authorities. We're not part of that health community, but they've been gracious to interact with me as they make decisions. They are very much in contact with their local superintendents, charter directors, and boards of education as they make decisions. So from a state perspective, I serve at your behest on the COVID task force and have conversations. I'm in a chain of command with the emergency command system. But in terms of, for example, what Cindy read, there's been no conversation about that. So I don't know how to get you into that conversation. How do you loop 15 people in? So there's the health department. These are health decisions that we're talking about. They're not educational decisions, but they impact education, schools being open or closed. But they really are based on health factors. So it's the health department that makes those decisions. That's why I'm so thrown off by what Cindy just read. It's statutory that those are the decisions. And the hope is that our conversations and our requests have been that we are at the table as they're making those decisions so that they, meaning the health department, sees the ramifications as decisions are made. So the process, I would assume, if we have some lead time, that the state board could weigh in a meeting, for example, of concerns that you had or questions, and those can be taken back to the health department. That's the process that I would assume would happen.
So what about recommendations for the 10% funding? If there are information or ideas that we're gathering there, where would that be? Where is the board's individual board members' role in that, or how can we contribute to that?
So again, as I mentioned earlier, the 10% is something that we're working on with ideas and we'll bring to you in a board meeting for you to sign off and give input as to how you want that 10% spent.
So that's in the
two different things that we're talking about. The health department is not involved in that 10%.
So what happens with that is we'll be making that decision. There's data being gathered to help us make an informed decision, and then we'll have some say on that with in regards to the health department and everything that's going on with the relationship with the governor and what happens in those physical facilities. we at the State Board of Education, we don't have any policies or anything in place that's gonna, we haven't in the past, that get to the place or the space of what we require for minimum cleaning before COVID. We haven't ever been in that space. That's been more of a local control kind of an item there. And so those relationships that the health department's having is on the local sides. The invitation is right from the superintendent to get into the queue and see what they're talking about or what they're talking about and what an expectation that they have or what are the expectations by local health departments by area as school opens up. They'll be different. We've already seen how the health departments have been a little bit different from geographic areas. And so that invitation is always there. And I think if you work with you can choose what health department you want to get involved in, and they're really good to answer your questions or hear any of your concerns.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying is that staff will put together recommendations, bring it for the board, and then that is our role to either say yes or no, or make recommendations at that point. Am I understanding that correctly?
For the 10%, yes.
It's not a yes or no, but it's a beginning of a discussion of this is what we've got from the field, and here's a recommendation to help inform you of what those needs are and how they're being met. And then we as a board will say exactly, well, it's at our discretion of how they're spent as long as they meet the criteria of the funding. So it's not a yes, no, it's what the board chooses to do. But it's nice to make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you.
So, and all right, Superintendent, it seems like there was board member Lear wanted to go to a space. I think budget. I think there was 2 board members that had questions on things that you've already covered, and I know you have more to cover. So, Superintendent, do you want to get through the rest of your presentation and then go back, or should we take board member Lear's question on budget? What would you like to do, Superintendent? Or do you have a preference?
I think at this point, I think I'm just looking down my list to see what needs to be addressed. Again, maybe just reiterate that we're working on a document. I'm still a little thrown by board member Davis because we gave a whole list of recommendations and I'm not sure what happened. We've been negotiating back and forth for a couple of days now, so I'm kind of distracted by all of that. But I would just say that driver's ed was mentioned today in the governor's press conference. And so we've been waiting for some written guidance that is supposed to come out to the LEAs. We've continued to offer driver's ed digitally and face-to-face. And also we've been doing some remote work on the driver's range. So a student can be in the car and you can have an instructor outside of the car. What hasn't been happening is that on the road driving, and that was a state determination among the Department of Health Driver's License Division and a couple of other divisions. So they've been creating that guidance and getting ready to send that out to us. So hearing that today makes me think that should be forthcoming today. So I'll circle back with them on that. The other thing that I heard today that I thought was so important, this came from Dr. Gosh, I've forgotten his name, who is, anyway, he serves on the emergency committee. And he talked about the conditions that they look at for risk. And he said, the good news is that 99% of the people who have COVID recover. and 92% of the people who have COVID recover at home. So we have a low hospitalization rate. But then what he said is the conditions for people at risk are their living, working, and underlying medical conditions. And so that will continue to impact our kiddos in terms of health risks for our kids, the conditions that they live in, that their families work in, and medical conditions of family members. So that kind of caught my ear this morning. I also want to reiterate that in this current phase of yellow, all of those people behind the scenes that work on various committees, they have determined that schools need to remain closed for the remainder of the year, but then they also talked about some sports. And I also want to mention that there are rumors out there that we've been dealing with a lot today, rumors that I've sent out a letter to teachers saying schools will be only digital next year. That's not true at all. I haven't sent out any letter. It's those kinds of things that there are all these communications that are out there. And so a lot of people, I'm sure wherever you go, whether it's to the grocery store or a walk on your street or maybe texts or phone calls, everybody wants to know, will school open in the fall? And obviously it's every intention to get kiddos back in schools, but it's also based on a variety of factors. So we're trying to create a document that can help us be nimble, as I mentioned last week, that will give all those guidelines that Board Member Nelson asked about, as well as some ideas for instructional models. And we've had we've had many of our districts and charters already being really proactive to try and do that within their own district or their own charter with their individual boards, looking at possible ways to be nimble and things that they could do to have small group, large group, different days, or just have everybody back with better safety conditions. Transportation continues to be a bit of a challenge when you think about some of those issues of getting a lot of kids on a bus and not being able to do multiple routes. So there's still a lot of things to work through, but we're trying to do as much as we can based on the conditions of families, the conditions of our schools, the conditions of funding, all of those things that we've talked about today. And we'll do our very best to try and get guidance out very soon.
Okay. Board member questions, comments. It seems like Board Member Lear, you had a question?
I did. It's way at the beginning of Dr. Dixon's presentation. And it also has to do with the meeting yesterday of executive appropriations. Heard yesterday, and I've heard her say that there'll be from the office, a projected 2%, 5%, 10% cut. And I'm just very interested in if and when the board would be able to weigh in on that, if that's just something that was intended only to come from the office, or if we'll have a state board discussion about board members' feelings and opinions about where those cuts could come from, or if if that projection would come from without the board input.
Superintendent?
So to be clear, we're talking about 2%, 5%, and 10%, not only in our office, but flow through programs as well. So those percentages apply to everything that we're looking at. I guess I would put that back to the leadership of the board, that how you see the role of a manager or a chair of an organization versus the role of the board. So I guess I'm just going to be honest that I would be a little concerned if the 15 board members start weighing in on all those individual decisions that we're making about staff and programs, but I would certainly welcome and want to hear your broad overview and how you want to see the way forward. So I think that's a broader discussion of management versus board when it comes to making decisions about programs within the organization and employees.
And may I follow up, Board Chair?
Yes.
I hear what you're saying, and I've not been one to usually want to interfere in the management of the board office, but I also see this very much like the board setting the priorities during the legislative session for programs for different kinds of training is a little is a smaller issue, but the board definitely participates in setting the priorities. And I see this, if we're setting priorities at the outset, now we've been told that our priorities don't, and I'm going to exaggerate for effect, our priorities are sort of on a back burner or don't matter. So it seems like the board should be involved in resetting the priorities. I don't see that as micromanagement. And I don't know if that means the board votes on all of those. I don't have any preconceived end point, but I do feel like the board members should be able to offer opinions about those, just as we offer opinions and take votes on priorities at the beginning of the session. If we don't have this opportunity in a crisis, then I feel like that rather minimizes our responsibility for overall education expenditures.
So, Superintendent, let me just weigh in on this. Part of our discussion on line item number 8, and then also next week, it's going to be all about the board and what the board wants and what the board priorities are and what they think right looks like, because we're expected to take that. We're expected to take that to public ed appropriations, or we want to be in a position to take it as we go before them. That's what we talked about last week, and that's why we're going to have all these meetings between now and the end of the month and continue, so that through the special session that we can that we staff and leadership can represent this board. Say this is what the board would like, and this is what we voted on. These are our priorities. This is, and it's just like what we've done before, but we're gonna have a shorter time frame. So, in managing board members' expectations, that's right here on the horizon, and we're going to talk a little bit about education budget and item that's listed here on our agenda as item 8. Did you want to weigh in, Superintendent? So is there other questions on the superintendent's report?
I'm sorry, I probably muted myself while I was talking. I just, if I might just say, I appreciate Board Member Lear's comments, and that helps me understand what she was asking for. We actually use the strategic plan as your priorities. So that is our guiding light. And if those priorities change, then we're happy to focus on different priorities that you might have. So that's how we have seen the board's priorities and thinking about how we move those things forward. But it helps to know what you were thinking behind your comments. So thank you, Board Member Lear, for expanding on that.
Okay, was there any other questions on the superintendent's report? Board Member Lear, your hand's still up.
I just had a short follow-up, and that was, I would hope we can, the board members can weigh in earlier rather than later, so that we aren't just presented with, here's what we're thinking, and then our backs are against the wall and we either have to say nothing or or just go along with what we're presented. So I just hope have that opportunity soon enough. Thank you. And I will stop on that now.
Okay, and it's coming in, and even though as we get into discussion items and stuff, you can certainly share anything that you think might be wasteful or something that you might think is priority. But our next meeting, hopefully our agenda doesn't have these other actual items on it, but that should be one of our primary focuses of getting through that. So like what was said last week, I asked all the board members to be thinking of what their highest priorities are, and knowing that not all of our public education expectations are going to be met, but we've got to bring something to the table to education, public education approach. So we'll be rolling our sleeves up and going to work. So whatever preparation that you can do as a board member ahead of time, or go back to previous budgets and or what you know as essential, helpful, duplicate. I missed one, superintendent. The second one was essential. Oh, it's right there. Thank you. Essential, helpful, nice to have, duplicated. So, that's just a space that we'll be having future conversations. I'm not seeing any other hands, superintendents. Thank you for the update. This is what we wanted you to do while we're in this this challenge that we're facing right now, and look forward to next week's superintendent's report. We're going to move right along with our agenda. The next item is basic civics test waivers. We have Assistant Superintendent Darren Nilsson. You want to take point on this? I don't think we need to get way down in the weeds where we were last week, but this is going to probably be on. Well, we know it's on today's agenda. Most likely, it'll be. It'll probably be again next week, as the LEAs are submitting their waivers. So, Assistant Superintendent Darren Nilsson.
Okay, Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning for the Utah State Board of Education. I guess the only thing I would say here, again, Chair, you acknowledged that last week there was a discussion around this topic. We've had an additional 5 LEAs submit waivers. I'd indicated last time that we talked about this, that our information we provided to the field at that time gave them 2 options, 2 board meetings for their waivers to be considered. And then the board subsequently scheduled these Thursday meetings to try to address additional issues and concerns that the board needs to focus on. After that happened, I went and we provided notification to the LEAs that they could submit their waivers rather than wait till the June 4th board meeting. Those who didn't meet the original submission, that they could submit those for consideration at this board meeting. So I'm not sure that we'll receive additional requests. We certainly could, it's possible. The LEAs who had been in communication with me about concerns in being able to gather the necessary information to submit to the board in time for the original May board meeting, they're included in this list. And so it's possible you'll see more, but at this point, these are the additional waiver requests that have come in from the field.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent Nielsen. Any questions or comments, or do we have a motion? Vice Chair Cummins, I'm not seeing any hands as I'm. Oh,
I make a motion. Board Member Earl has a hand.
Board Member Earl.
Yes, I just have a quick comment. And I know that we're probably closer to 10% that are opting out now. Last week it was 9. But it would be great to know, some districts are not, they have very low opt-out if they have any at all. And I just wonder if it would be good moving forward, maybe not necessarily this month or next month, but Robert Austin, if he would mind checking into what are the strategies they're using in order to accomplish this. And, providing some framework for others moving forward, so there isn't such a high opt-out on the basic civics test. So it's just more of a suggestion. So thank you.
Board Member Belknap. Member Belknap.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the waivers of the basic civics test as requested, and I'd like to speak to that.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second that. Board Member Marsh.
Member Marsh, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, please. The only thing I wanted to say is that there's no ability to waive this basic civics test other than in this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion to the motion. Seeing none, help me out now and again, Vice Chair Cummings. I'm trying to scan it too. Seeing none, we're going to vote. The motion before the board is that the board approve the waivers of the basic civics test as requested. Board members, we're going to do this electronically. Board Member Marsh, I think you can't raise your hand, can you, or check a box, or use the check or X?
He has his hand raised as an I.
Oh, he can then. Okay, so it's Scott Nielsen.
Correct.
Board Member Nielsen, are you voting on this?
Lost him. He's driving home from St. George, dropping off troops down there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. It appears the voting was unanimous. Is that what you're seeing, Vice Chair Cummings, on your? Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we'll invite.
Can I interrupt really quick, Chair Huntsman? Just a reminder to all the board members to just unclick their vote now before we move on. So,
Okay.
unclick it.
It doesn't hurt to double check. I think Board Member Newell, I think you still have a check on there. I'm seeing it. Okay, next we want to invite Sarah Young, Director of our Strategic Initiatives. She's going to talk about our K through 12 Education Models Discretionary Grant Program.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. So this particular item is a draft kind of straw man proposal related to a competitive grant opportunity that is being offered by the U.S. Department of Education. It is called the Rethink K-12 Education Models Discretionary Grants Program. And you'll see in our backup, we've given an overview. This opportunity did come about specific and in response to COVID-19. So you'll see that it does have a pretty quick time frame in regards to providing an intent to apply by next week and having a full competitive proposal submitted by the end of June. As a part of that, this grant program has 3 potential priorities, and states who are applying are asked to identify the priority they will apply for. We are proposing as staff that our agency considers the opportunity to apply for absolute priority 1, which are the continued learning parent microgrants. The justification for this selection is the alignment with our board strategic plan for personalized learning. We do note that in this competitive application, there is scoring criteria similar to what you saw Dr. Curry present in regards to looking at the impact of COVID-19 in Utah as comparative to other states. We are a low impact state in regards to being identified as receiving 4 out of the possible 20 points in that factor analysis. And in addition to that, we selected then a priority that we thought not only would meet that personalized learning need, but was also a space we could be competitive, recognizing that all three of the priorities present opportunity. This was just a kind of consideration of staff. So you'll see our draft kind of idea behind that priority would be to partner with organizations that have the opportunity to expand digital course access related to concurrent enrollment, as well as links to certificates in higher education. We do provide an exemplar partner, but I'd like to be clear, we haven't engaged in conversations with those entities yet. We're really waiting for direction from the State Board of Education. And that this would really be targeted at those communities that, number one, struggle to have access to all of that diverse coursework in their existing systems and partnerships, as well as addressing our populations of highest need related to COVID-19, where it's possible remote and distance learning is going to be definitely incorporated into the future vision for education. So that is my overview. We are really here asking for your input and direction in regards to not just the proposal itself and the opportunity and whether we've identified the correct priority, if there's others we should consider, but also if this is an opportunity that you would like staff to pursue in terms of developing a proposal for any of the priorities. So thank you so much, and I would turn it over to you for comments and direction.
Okay, questions from board members. Board member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, if I could direct this directly to you. So it is a SEA, so you apply, and then the schools would apply back to us if you get this. Is that correct?
So in this particular proposal, it actually limits the ability to be able to award subgrants. So the services would be administered by the state agency. And yes, LEAs would have the opportunity actually as part of the development of the proposal process to also let us know if they were interested in participating.
Thank you. And Chair, are we seeking a motion or just a nod of heads here?
Well, it would be there is a motion, and it's, and I have a draft motion here that would read that the board approves staff pursuing development of the Rethink K through 12 education models discretionary grant program in alignment with the proposal as presented.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I would second that, Chairman, this board member Marsh.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Marsh. Discussion to the motion. Board member Earl.
Yes, I just have a couple questions. So if I understand, you gave some examples of possible entities just as suggestions of those who we might consider as being grant recipients. How will we recommend grant recipients, or how will grant recipients moving forward, how can they get on that list, or how can LEAs make recommendations for possible, what I'm looking here, remote, field initiated models for providing remote education not yet imagined? How does an entity do that? Is that part of our submission, or not necessarily next week's, because that's just the intent, but the actual application we send in, how does an entity go about getting their name as part of that? Or is that not the case? It would be an overall grant and then they would submit later. Could you just clarify that, please?
Director Young.
So in terms of our process, Board Member Earl, we would most likely do kind of a two-tiered approach. So first and foremost would be, depending on the directions we receive from the board today, we would then share the overview of the direction we're looking to go with our individual LEA leaders. to be able to get a sense, number one, of their interest in being a partner in this effort. And then number two, if they had additional partners that could be possible in terms of collaborators in providing those unique and innovative remote learning solutions. So we would do that on the front end as part of then our next steps to develop a full proposal and incorporating those pieces.
So Director Young, could you speak to how you will solicit input from the LEAs? And I think that's where Board Member Earl is at. What's the process to get this to the finish line?
Thank you for that clarification. So we would conduct a survey by providing them a copy of the document you see before you with any modifications, and then a survey to our LEAs asking for their interest and input related to this opportunity.
And then you take that information and you incorporate that in to this application.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering why we're not applying for the second, or is that, or are higher education entities applying for the second grants?
So each SEA is allowed to apply for one of the priorities.
Just one or the other?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay, Board Member Davis. Board Member Davis, did you have a question? Hopefully I'm not goofing this up. Board Member. Have you heard? Oh, Davis.
Mute. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I hit my unmute button about 7 times. Like me today. I just wanted to say that I'm glad we're applying under this specific area. I think that Utah has really been a leader in the personal learning space and the digital learning space. And while it's true we may not hit all of the criteria on the most highly impacted, we have a lot to offer in setting an example and leading out and a pathway for other states to follow. So I think we've had other states reach out to us, as Director Young knows. Several other states have reached out to us as an example in this space. And I think with increased resources, we could continue to develop and lead out and be a help not only to our students in Utah, but to outside of the state as well. And hopefully that will be mentioned in the application as well.
Okay. Thank you, Member Davis. Member Earl, did you have another question?
Sorry, thanks for helping clarify things. I just have one other question with this process. Is this going to be similar to the outline we had earlier? In other words, those that are prioritized in the state at higher priority, will those also be the ones that would receive the grants before others, or is it just, will there be other criteria that they will base those micro grants on? Or is that just whatever we decide as a board?
Director Young?
So that will be part of the development process. We don't have any kind of preconceived notions coming into that. Now that we, or I guess after this action item, we have that direction, we'll be able to dig deeper into being able to provide more specifics for the Board of Education to consider.
Okay, so there's not a predetermined, this is the outline based on individual needs to those at the highest level currently, as from our previous document at the first of our meeting?
So there is direction in the actual grant itself that it does need to be targeted at impacts, at populations and schools that have been highly impacted by COVID-19. But as Dr. Curry showed. So that document itself is still in process and it hasn't been adopted as the exact framework that we would use for this application.
Thank you.
Okay. Member Davis, did you have your hand up or just accidentally left on? Oh, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments, so we're going to vote on this. The motion before the board is that the board approve staff pursuing development of the Rethink K-12 Education Models Discretionary Grant Program in alignment with the proposal as presented. So if we would all vote, and if Board Member Nielsen's on, if he would. Board Member Cannon. Here we go. Vice Chair Cummins, are you seeing what I'm seeing? It appears it's unanimous.
Yes.
Okay, the voting is unanimous. Thank you, board members. Motion passes. Okay. So, to Vice Chair Brittany Cummins' request would be to uncheck or unhand yourself here on this voting. So I'm going to do that right now. Thank you, board members. Okay, next on our agenda is under agenda item number 5 by Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings to do some housekeeping items. I think we've got 2 of them, but let's just do one at a time. The under 5 is R277-419. If you can give a quick background and why we're here, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Huntsman. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. So this week, 2 days ago, me and a number of our financial ops staff provided a training to district business officials as well as charter school financial experts. And while we were presenting the new language that you approved last week, we received some feedback for a 1-word change. And so just a reminder, last week during your Thursday board meeting, you approved R277-419 draft 3. And the substantive portion of draft 3 was the inclusion of this new language on lines 405 through 412. And so that was what I was presenting to the group on Tuesday. And we as staff are planning to file this new rule draft with the Office of Administrative Rules tomorrow. And so it was very timely that you were having a meeting today so that we could make that 1-word change before we file tomorrow. So this would be the staff's recommendation to change the word attendance to membership on line 408. And our recommendation is that the board adopt or approve draft 4 on 3rd and final reading.
Okay, board members. Any questions? Board Member Belknap. Board Member Belknap.
Yes. I make a motion that we approve R277-419 draft 4 on 2nd and final reading. Is that what I would say, Ange?
On 3rd.
On 3rd reading. Thanks, Chair.
And I'll second. Board Member Newell will second.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Newell. The motion before the board to approve R277-419 draft 4 on 3rd and final reading. Discussion to that motion. Board Member Lear. Your hand's up, Board Member Lear.
Yeah, it is. I'm just mute. We have the same. All of us have the unmuting problem. Yes, I'm looking at lines 410 and 411, and I'm concerned about some lack of specificity, and I either want the record or I would maybe look for some amending language amendments. On 410, it has submitted, an LEA has submitted a continuity of education plan anytime by March 30th. It seems that this could allow an LEA to go until it was pushed to the wall that said submit a continuity of education plan, which seems a pretty doable situation for any LEA, but until a deadline is imposed there, I would be troubled by that. And then also on parentheses 2, line 411, do you think we need, is educational services defined? Or it could an LEA say, well, because it has to do both. And I've at least heard, and I know Dr. Dixon warned us about not believing every rumor we hear, but I've certainly heard of LEAs that have already stopped teaching. So does educational services need to be defined? Do we need to, and do we need to put a date in on line 410?
Angie, Deputy
Great.
Superintendent Stallings, do you have
Yes, thank you, Chair. Those are great questions. So as to the first one, I believe that we have received a continuity of education plan from all LEAs. And if we haven't, somebody else on the list might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. So, but we could, I think your point is well taken though, or Member Lear, that maybe we want to put the LEA has submitted a continuity of education plan on or before, and we could put June 1, 2020. I mean, although they should have submitted it earlier than that, because these continuity of education plans were meant to be the plan where they described how, as we moved into this virtual and distance learning, how they were going to adapt their instruction and providing services in the new environment versus some schools were used to a more attendance verified or seat time or type of model where students were in the building together with their teachers. And so I'd be open for input on that so as to not harm anyone. I might recommend that if we put a date in there, we just place it as June 1, 2020. And if anybody disagrees with that, please let me know of a better date. We could actually also put May 15th if you'd like, which would be the date of submitting this rule.
So
there was in follow-up, please, Chair.
Yes, follow up.
There's another half to my question that I'm sure
yes.
I get to, but as to the date, or as to these continuity of education plans, have based on some prior experiences recent, have anybody reviewed those to see if they are appropriate, adequate, sufficient, or do we just know by count that we have one for every LEA?
That's another good question. And I have not reviewed those continuity of education plans. We have left this up to, in general, local discretion and decisions at the district and the charter school level. And so the plans vary quite a bit. We did not provide any specific, there were some requirements. They are listed on the coronavirus webpage, but as to rigor or how many days or how you provide instruction, that was not provided or required as part of what you submitted. So they are broad. We have had someone in our office who's been reviewing those continuity of education plans, but it's not something where we've said, this is good, this is bad, or made any judgment calls on that. So, and I know you had a second question, and I was planning to address a second question, but just wanted to make sure that if we were discussing a potential amendment, that we finished at least addressing the first one. So if without objection, or Board Member Lear, if you do want to make an amendment, I would maybe recommend that you add on or before June 1, 2020 to line 411. And then for the second question, you asked whether or not we felt that educational services should be defined. We did not define that by design, to leave again that discretion up to the locals to determine what educational services mean. You will note that it does not say instruction or instructional services, but it's a broader term of educational services that could include meal services or making sure that the school is open and available for consults or whatever the LEA has decided. So Superintendent Dixon sent out a letter, or an email, I should say, to all district and charter heads, so the charter directors and superintendents, kind of providing some examples of what educational services might include. But by design, we left that term vague so that it would be up to the locals to determine what educational services meant. But the message that was meant to be sent is, after this language, just as a refresher, when this language was presented to the Finance Committee in, I want to say it would have been April, we did not have lines 413 and 414 in there. It was just if you had submitted a continuity of education plan. And implied in that was always the understanding that schools would continue to provide educational services through the end of their regular school year. What happened after the Finance Committee adopted that language or approved that language is we had and I don't want to say quite a few, but we had a couple of LEAs ask if they could cut their school year off early, 2 weeks early, and say end school on May 15th, for example, or for a school maybe that was planning to go a week or two after Memorial Day to simply end their school year the Friday before Memorial Weekend. So we as staff, you may remember, asked Finance Committee Chair Belknap to make a substitute motion to adopt draft 3 last week to clarify that the expectation of the board, although we did waive, meaning the board waived the 180 and the 990, that the expectation has always been that a school remains open and provides services to the school community, to students and families through the end of their regular school year. Now, what that means, and whether that means they do virtual field trips the last week, they do celebrations the last week, they're turning in Chromebooks, things that schools would normally do the last week of school. As you know, they're not always providing new content instruction right up until the last minute that the bell ends on that last day of school. So the intent is to allow that discretion that they already have when they're in a school building of what their last week looks like, or their last couple of weeks look like, and how they phase out to new instruction, and maybe take time for students to turn in old assignments, or to work individually with students, provide the school breakfast, school lunch, etc. And hopefully that helps.
That helps. I'm fine if we intended it to keep it that broad. I'm fine about that. Also, I like the amendment, and I would also ask you to drop the apostrophes on all the LEAs in that paragraph. And other than that, I'm great. Thank you.
Chair, may I make one?
Yes.
I would recommend we keep the apostrophes, because we are writing in the singular here. If you see, it says the superintendent shall calculate an LEA's membership, the LEA. So if you don't mind, we'd like to keep the apostrophes.
Totally apologize. You are absolutely.
Okay, so
And I'm so sorry. Not a problem. Thank you.
Without any objections, I would like to have that on or before June 21st, 2020 be included in our draft. What draft was this again? Draft 4. Is there any objection from board members? Okay, any other discussion on this. Board Member Cannon, your hand is raised. Board Member Lear, your hand is still raised. Scott Hansen. And Scott Hansen's hand's raised. So Board Member Cannon.
Question for Angie. Noticing on line 409, they've changed the LEA's average rate of attendance to membership. That seems like the thrust of this. Would you just comment on how an average rate of attendance, of course, kids have only been attending online, how that differs from the LEA's average rate of membership, and kind of compare the two for us so we know exactly what the change is here? Thank you.
Yes. Chair Huntsman, is that okay if I answer?
Yes.
Great question, and thank you for asking that. So as you can imagine, you have a membership record, which means it's the number of students who are on as considered part of your school of enrollment. And it may not be the number of students in actual attendance that day. So I'll take like an average or a smallish elementary school. And let's say that elementary school has 350 students enrolled in that school. The membership for that school day to day would be at around 350, and versus the attendance might be 325 or 330 for a given day. How a membership record changes, meaning the time when a student is removed from membership happens after the student has not been in attendance or has had unexcused absences of 10 days or more. After 10 days of unexcused absences, that student would drop from membership. Or also another reason why a student might drop from membership is the student unenrolls and then enrolls in another school. So that's the difference between membership and attendance. Attendance plays a role in determining membership, but whether or not a student attends a given day doesn't impact their membership. It only becomes an issue when you have a student who has not attended for 10 days or more consecutively, and those are unexcused.
Okay, did you have a follow-up, Board Member Cannon?
No, thank you for that, Angie.
Okay. Board Member Hansen.
Thanks. If I could just direct a question to Angie, please. Just wondering if, with the information that we have on the various LEAs and what they've been doing and the information they submitted to us, is there any LEA that we know of that's going to run afoul of this rule as it's currently amended?
I don't believe so. And I apologize, Chair. Should I move forward? As far as we know, all of our LEAs have submitted continuity of education plans, and all of our LEAs intend to provide educational services through the end of their regular calendar year. As I mentioned, we received some questions after the Finance Committee discussion of this language, and I believe that the language addition on 413 and 414, when the board adopted that last week, clarified the intent of the board was for all of our schools to continue to provide services through the end of their school year. So as far as I know now, the message has been sent, the questions were answered, and everybody understands the intent. And so I trust that all of our LEAs are going to follow your what you've asked here.
Okay, or at least they've been fully informed and should be. All right, thank you.
Hey. Remember, Lear, your hand is still raised. Or
I meant it to be still raised. I have another question on this membership issue, and it more goes to the explanation that Angie gave and not so much the words of the new paragraph. But I just wanted to clarify something with her, and because it probably does go to the understanding that some LEAs have. When we talk about dropping the student from membership, don't we mean they are no longer counted? Isn't that a reference to the 10-day rule? So they're no longer counted for purposes of funding. But I wouldn't want to think that meant then an LEA, either a traditional LEA or a charter school, would then completely forget about that student or completely take the student off of its school roles or district roles. Am I misunderstanding that, Angie? Would you like to, because I feel like the schools need to keep those students' names, whether it's a charter school or a traditional school, so that they can continue to keep that student or to request that that student return or work with the parents. But it does end the funding for a period. Am I explaining that nuance correctly?
Deputy Superintendent Stallings, yes.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I understand your question and agree with what you stated as the intent is that even if a student, let's say, does not attend for 10 days and they are dropped off of the membership roll, we would hope that our schools would be reaching out to the student or the student's family to see what's going on, or if there's some barrier or something, some support that that student needs or the family needs. And just as other information, if a student were to drop out in high school, for example, we have a couple of measurements that we take, meaning if a student were to just drop from membership of a high school and not re-enroll in another school, that student would be part of the high school's graduation rate calculation, for example. We also have another program that you may be aware of, the Dropout Recovery or Dropout Prevention Recovery Program, that talks about how when students drop off because they have not been in attendance, they may drop off of your membership, but they're still associated with or attached to the last school that they were enrolled in. And so part of this is now getting into a discussion where Corby Eason would probably be a better person to answer your questions. But we do work with LEAs and to support them in analyzing data about student attendance and trying to identify when students are not attending, what is that reason? Is it just because they need a schedule change? Is it because they've got issues getting to school on time or they need to leave early for whatever reason, and trying to find accommodations for students and families that make it so that they can be engaged and feel supported at school. So absolutely, you're correct, Board Member Lear, that once that student drops from membership, it doesn't mean that their duty or their relationship with that student should end. They should still be continuing to provide supports to those students and trying to identify ways to engage the student back in school.
And sorry, I have one more brief follow-up to that, Chair. I just think that we maybe need to look for some language so that LEAs better understand that. This is a crisis moment, and I'm not trying to come up with perfect language right now, but I think there is a common misunderstanding among some LEAs that that means we get to say that person's no longer in our school and that student. I don't think we intend that. We mean that the funding stops until the student returns or transfers to another student or school. So I'd like to maybe look for some language that communicates that. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands, so we're going to vote on this. The motion before the board is that the board approve R277-419 draft 4 on third and final reading. So board members, this is the time to vote. And if Scott Nelson's on the phone, if you want to verbally recognize his vote, I don't think he's with us. Okay, the voting is complete, and Vice Chair Cummins, it appears that it's unanimous. Am I missing one?
It did appear. So Board Member Lear and Board Member Marsh took their hands down. Just want to make sure.
Oh, there's one. I thought I saw a hand my first time
had
through.
it.
Okay.
Now it's gone.
Chair Huntsman,
Yes.
I raised my hand, so.
Okay.
Okay.
So yes,
Got it.
was unanimous.
Okay, voting's unanimous. Motion carries. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, will you introduce R277-302, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just as a reminder, again, similar to R277-419, this rule, R277-302, which is educator licensing renewal, was also reviewed by the Law and Licensing Committee in April and then approved by the board last week. And last week's version, draft 4, was approved by the board. Since that time, in the last couple of days, again, this is an anomaly because we don't usually have board meetings that immediately occur right after another board meeting, and also before we're about to file a rule with the Office of Administrative Rules. But we received some feedback to delete or change language on lines 96 and line 136. And so the language change on 96 is pretty small. All it does is it just eliminates those lines and relies on, has participated in professional learning activities as required by the subsection below. So let's take a look at line 136. This is where the substantive change occurs, and it's more of a clarification of intent of staff. And as we received a question about what it means for an LEA to provide the licensing renewal points, people felt, or staff and others felt, it was better to change the wording to shall provide opportunities for the individual to complete a minimum of 20 license renewal points. And that was to reflect the idea that the LEA doesn't necessarily have to provide the actual courses or the opportunities, but instead point the educator or provide the time or opportunity for the individual to complete those points. And it may be through the LEA, it may be through an outside party. So our recommendation as staff is that you approve draft 5 on third and final reading. And again, the only changes to the rule are the language changes on lines 96 and 136.
Okay, we still have some checks and hands up from the previous round of voting, maybe. So if you guys can check. Any discussion or any questions over this? I'll go with Scott Hansen. You still have a check on yours, but Board Member Earl, did you have a question? Board Member Earl? Okay. Board Member Belknap?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we approve our 277-302 draft 5 on third and final reading.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that, Chair Huntsman, Mark Marsh.
We have a motion and a second. Did you want to speak to the motion, Board Member Belknap?
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to discussion. Jenny Earl, your hand is still up. Did you have? Cindy Davis, you still have a chat? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Do you see any, Vice Chair Cummins? Discussion? Okay, seeing none, we're going to vote. The motion before the board is that the board approve R277-302 education licensing renewal draft 5 on third and final reading. All those in favor, please check. Board Member Marsh. Yep, I got it. I see it. Well, I saw it and then it went. Vice Chair Cummings, it appears that the voting was unanimous. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The motion passes unanimously. The motion carries. So thank you. So I guess it's a time to uncheck. Okay, next item is fiscal year 21 education budget. This is a discussion item. Who will be speaking to this is myself, and we have Superintendent Dixon and our interim deputy superintendent, Deborah Jacobson. So can we, I think there's an exhibit to bring up. So in our previous discussions from our last board meeting last week, and as we outlined the justification of why we're going to be meeting in these other board meetings, and of course we have a big lift next week on fiscal year 21 budget. This is maybe Superintendent Dixon, you can weigh in on this spreadsheet and how this was put together, or you can defer it to interim deputy superintendent. And so what would you like to do, Superintendent? What would be best?
She had to go to her meeting with the health department.
I figured that, so, but I didn't see that she left. So, well, so Deborah, do you want to explain this kind of a little starting point here and give a little background on this spreadsheet that's before us?
Sure. These are what they call the range forecasting that the LFA put before, or the LFA's office put before EAC yesterday. This is basically comparing where we were in February and where we are today and what those projections look like moving forward. So as of yesterday, their estimates, and again, these are just estimates, are a $200 to $600 million shortfall for FY20 and a $600 million to $1.3 billion shortfall for FY21. The thing to remember about this, though, is that this is statewide. It's not just education funds. It's all tax revenue that is expected to come in. So we'll get more of those breakdowns as we go. They will then eventually give a point forecast, which is the one where we actually set our budgets, the legislature actually appropriates funds from, assuming that those shortfalls will come to pass. So the other thing with this is, if you'll remember, in Senate Bill 3001, our FY20 budgets have already been reduced by about $45 million, moving in, anticipating some of these shortfalls. So they've already taken action on that. And we're just waiting now for, obviously, the next session to discuss the cuts for FY21. One other thing to kind of keep in mind is they will actually typically reduce any new funding that came out of the 20 session before they'll start taking cuts to the base budget. So again, there's a chance that we won't see any cuts to the base budget, but we also have to prepare for that as well. So that's pretty much it on this particular document.
This is the only exhibit that we have. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. We'll be formulating different ones for next week. So questions from board members. And Not seeing any hands, but a few checks went off. So on this education budget for fiscal year 21, we'll be kind of dealing next week with anticipated shortfalls to our funding, and depending on what scenario that we're working with, would be speaking to a little bit of how the priorities will, our priorities will play out, which is completely different than what that I've ever done in the past. It's always been talking a little bit about status quo and then new money. And this dialogue that we'll be having next week will be hopeful that we'll have the base budget, but we'll be talking about some other programs and other things that are kind of on the table. The one thing that I haven't spoke with any leadership. I haven't spoke with any of the LFAs. So I'm not sure what their appetite will be on this, but I do know this. They do value what comes from this board, and they'll listen to it. So we have some work to do.
Chair,
yes.
If I could really quickly. So that's part of what we'll be doing next week, and I'm hoping to wrap up staff recommendations by hopefully late Monday. I'd like to get those out to the board as soon as possible so that it will give you at least a couple of days, if anything, to kind of review them, hopefully have some time to get some questions answered, and maybe other suggestions ready to go for the board meeting next Thursday. As we're hoping to get board's direction on what your recommendations and priorities are going into PEA on the 27th.
So, and Deborah, I have full faith that you'll get something to us Monday, but also in that communication, in preparation, there'll probably be some questions. And so if there's any way we can link or have access to, we're not sure what staff is exactly working on this. So if we can get that through the superintendent, and that's so whether there's certain programs or something that our board members can reach out on their own and get down in the weeds a little bit, post Monday, a little bit into Tuesday, a little bit into Wednesday, and try to minimize some discovery.
Sure.
By Thursday, I think our meeting will go a lot better on Thursday.
Okay.
The way I see it. I do see a hand up. I believe it's board member Cannon.
Thank you, Chair. I am thinking about something Deborah said, that the legislature will automatically eliminate any new funding before they start making cuts. I wonder if perhaps she could give us some specific examples of what new funding we got that may be eliminated before cuts by the EAC.
So it's anything that would have been outside of House Bill 1. Some direct. The 6% WPU will be one of them, for sure. Let me see if I can find some really quickly. There was some leadership money. There were some new initiatives. The interactive reading software. There were several initiatives that came through that were additional money.
So we can definitely send this to the board members in our.
Sure. Sure. You want a list of all new funding that?
All new funding so that we can, the board members will be informed on exactly what's at risk and.
Perfect. Okay.
What was at risk and.
Sure. And one other thing to consider is if there's something that we want to prioritize that's new funding that we want to make sure or try to retain in some way, we're going to have to make an equal, a cut of equal value out of the base budget in order for them to consider that.
That is correct. Does that, board member Cannon, does that answer your question? And then also what we can, I mean, it's not going to give all of the details today, but we can get.
Yes. I'll appreciate seeing that detail. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. Board member Haynes.
There it is. Thank you. This is great information. 2 questions, if I may. One, have we communicated with, or has this information been sent out to the LEAs at all? Are we getting any input from them as to what their priorities would be? Do they know about the new money? Do they know about the money that's at risk? And is there something that when the information comes to us as board members that we could use to work with those LEAs in communicating what some of their priorities may be, if they're any different than ours? I mean, I just think it would be best to understand what they feel is a priority as well. I mean, we have such a short time before the PEA next week, before going before them and submitting our priorities. I just wanted to know what kind of input we've collected from those LEAs.
Right.
Yeah, Deborah.
So sorry. So as far as the LEAs are concerned, they have been told that they should be budgeting just to House Bill 1. And as far as us getting any input from them, there really just hasn't been any time for a lot of these in order to get that kind of information from them. At this point, our main priority is making sure that the board's priorities are communicated to the legislature and make sure those are heard.
And if I might weigh in, and this is, I haven't been able to talk to any legislative leadership or public ed's appropriation leadership there also. Normally during these processes, they individually want input from us, and they usually want input from the JLC, and they want to check everyone's pulses. But I do not know. I haven't been told, and I haven't been informed that they've reached out to those entities. It's just that's what they've done in the past moving forward. But I'm sure between now and Thursday that we're going to hear from them. I'm going to chase down some people on the charter side, and then also on the district side. To Terry Shoemaker, still on board. There's a replacement there for him. I'll reach out to both of them and see what work that they are doing on their side to see if we can get something before it. But I'm not sure if they've had that communication. That hasn't happened. Or, I mean, I haven't had that communication, and neither has the superintendent.
No.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Board Member Davis.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, I'm trying to read through this really quickly to see if, for example, USIMS was in HB1 or not. And if I understand you correctly, I mean, we have writing on that sucker, and I think it was like $17 million for this coming year. If we wanted to, for example, advocate to keep something like the USIMS funding, and it was not in the HB1, what you are saying is that if we advocate for that, we have to come back with a recommendation of where to cut that $17 million out of the base budget. Is that what I'm understanding you saying?
So USIMS in particular we were given all of that funding all at once. That is meant to, so it's gonna end up being carried forward into the following years. So in this particular place, USIMS is not included in this funding.
Awesome. Okay.
It's not funding that will get cut in 21.
Thank you.
Board Member Earl.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I apologize. I've had some audio issues that I've been trying to rectify. I'm sorry, and maybe I'm just wanting a little clearer vision here for the board. Is when you say the board's priorities, I'm unclear actually what you're referring to. Are these priorities staff puts together that they'll bring to us Monday for our priorities, and then we vote on those next week? Or are we actually creating some board priorities? I'm just not clear as to exactly what that means. If you wouldn't mind clarifying that, I would appreciate it.
Deborah, did you want to cover that, or I can?
Oh, okay, you can.
Okay, I figured. So staff, in an effort to our goals, and then also those 4 areas of essential to duplicated, are going to come to us next week, or we're going to get it in advance, some recommendations. And then we can consider those recommendations, or we can consider our own priorities outside of those recommendations. And we'll be having lengthy discussion and motions in dealing with those possible reductions and or priorities. So it's kind of a basis to start, so that somebody will say, oh, is there room, or these programs are duplicated, and the risk of having one of them leave may mean it can still stay propped up in this other space. It's just to help us become informed and to expedite our dialogue and our priorities. So you can totally, as a board member, ignore them and come up with your own list, or we can see and listen and ask questions about them, and then take whatever considerations we want and put in the form of motion to come up with our recommendation. They won't be staff recommendations. It'll be the board recommendations that will be taken to public education. And who will be taking those will be Brittany and myself, leadership, and also staff, as we're lobbying and working to fund public education under the guidelines that they're asking us to stay in. Now, we have been in this space before where public ed's approach said, I need you to stay in these guidelines. And we came really close. We didn't stay in their guidelines. And they found some other money, and some good things happened and walked us way up until this pandemic hit. But they are giving us guidelines, and we'll try to stay in those guidelines and margin as best we can. And if we choose to go outside them a little bit, then we do that, and we take our recommendations to and priorities to public ed approach. So,
Okay. Today is not really the day for us to make any recommendations. We wait till staff puts that together and then we can decide whether or not we want those as our recommendations, if that's what I'm understanding. So
no, we can do whatever we want next week as a board, but we'll have those recommendations behind us, and it's all up to us as a board to prioritize different things. If we've had topics in the past, and many of us can remember them as we debated trying to move up a priority or less of a priority, but this will be a unique conversation because this is all about the wheels on the bus, keeping public education propped up, and so it's all up to us, 15-member board, to come to a consensus through motions and take our recommendations to public, which then in turn they will deem their own what they think the priorities are, and then we'll make that up to appropriation. So we do play a role in this.
okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Chair?
Okay, yeah, I'm just, okay. Brittany, who am I missing on the hands? Oh, was that Deborah?
Yeah, that was me. That's Deborah.
Deborah,
Sorry.
did you want to weigh in before I call on someone?
Yeah, I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to, it looks like Jeff has pulled up the list that EAC had provided yesterday in the meeting of all new funding. So here's all the new funding that would be first to go, with the exception of, we noticed that enrollment growth is on here. Enrollment growth was actually in the base bill, so that should not be on this list.
Okay.
So hopefully that answers Board Member Cannon's question.
Okay. Board Member Lear.
Yes, I have a question. It's kind of a follow-up to Board Member Earl's, and I just want to make sure I understand so I can be prepared next week. First of all, is this list complete that we're looking at right now of what and this came from the meeting yesterday, I think. This was all the new money for this year, is that right? Is this everything? Or I think that was just qualified by Deborah to say it's everything that wasn't in House Bill 1, is that right?
Yes, this was all new money.
Okay.
Outside of House Bill 1, outside of the base bill.
Okay, and then I also asked, and I think I have a satisfactory answer from Jeff, if we wanted to reach back to funding from 2018 or 19 that's continuing funding, like for TSSA or turnaround or any of those, it could be our recommendation to cut that instead of cutting, for instance, USIMS. Well, that's last year's money too, but we could, if we felt very strongly about something that was new this year, we could advocate for cutting something from a past year that we weren't excited about. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So I just want to speak to, this might be helpful for those here. I received a communication from Terry, the USSA has been working with Public Ed Appropriation Committee on cuts, and their list should be completed by this weekend. And so if there's something I can get or something from them or input to, I believe it was Board Member Haynes' question about hearing from them. They have been contacted and they are working on some stuff. So hopefully we'll have that in hand before we do our work.
Okay, I had one more follow-up too to my question.
Okay, one more follow-up and then we've got other hands. Board Member Lear.
I do. I wanted to ask if we could get a list of the ongoing funding that came from previous years, so we would know what is continuing that we could perhaps substitute something we really like on this list. Is that too much to ask?
That's actually part of the list that we will be giving you as our recommendation. Is you'll have a list of all ongoing programs that we've been in for years. Because these cuts that we're going to try to, the 2, 5, and 10 are supposed to come out of the base budget.
Okay.
That's what we'll be working through next week.
Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Davis. Okay. Board Member Lear, your hand's still up. So we're going to be working diligently to make sure the board gets something on Monday as best we can with pretty good overview of our situation from one time ongoing and etc. And we should, a good portion of our next meeting, and I don't think there's going to have any rules or anything in it, is going to be committed and dedicated to preparation for public ed approach. We're still going through discovery a little bit here and there, but we're going to get started on it. Get ready. So is there any other questions? I mean, it'd be nice to get right down in the weeds, but I don't think we're quite prepared, and or with staff, based on how we've gotten our information. And Board Member Earl, your hand's up.
Sorry, just one more question. So when you're saying get ready, you would like us, what would be the best way for us to get ready for next week? Because really we're waiting for staff to make prioritized recommendations. So help me understand, what's the best way I can prepare for next week so I'm prepared fully as a board member?
Which is a very good question. You can opt to kind of go back to previous documents and see what was funded. You can go back to the Deborah, wasn't it 1004, the limitations on that on the budgets? We can do kind of your own research. But the biggest question is, short of getting that information on Monday from staff and how all of this is packaged and formatted in a way that you can identify and move and see what's truly at risk, is be looking at assessing your own priorities. But you can also reach out to anyone that you know that's within the USSA to see what's happening there, pending waiting for their recommendations also. But I think the most efficient way to evaluate what's at risk and actionable items is going to be what is delivered on Monday. Like from myself and serving on the finance committee, and that I do assess risk, and I'm looking at them, but I'm not sure if I'm going to see all of it, as well as what staff is preparing for us to review.
Okay, in all fairness, I thought for some reason that might be what we were doing today, and I was prepared with a number of priorities. Should I just send those on to staff? How does that work?
Of your priorities?
Yeah, I've gone back through some of the budgets, and some recommendations that as a board member I would make. What would be the best way to disseminate that information?
I would be prepared to sell the board on your recommendations next Thursday in a form of a motion, priority, however you want to do it, because that will be a place to place a motion. You can certainly reach out to staff and ask them in advance if you're looking at these other priorities, how might they affect your list? What do they give you any feedback on it? That would be something you could do, Member Earl. I don't want to tell you what to do. You're a board member, but we're
right. And just like I said, I thought we were coming with that intent today, and that's fine. I'll reach out with just some suggestions, possible recommendations, and then we'll take their priority list and I guess weigh it against individual board members. Is that kind of
that's what's going to happen next? That's what's going to happen next week.
So that's the work next week. Okay.
Is where you're going to be making. You'll be making motions and to get a 15-member board to get behind those, and there'll be lengthy debates and.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome to send them out in advance to board members if you want. I'm curious, so I wouldn't mind seeing them, but we're not taking motions today. So is there any other questions on this process? Do you see, Deborah, do you see anything coming from the LFAs at all between now and Thursday that might help us steer the ship on the magnitude of the cuts that are going to be required?
We really haven't. They don't have, it's really all still very raw and preliminary at this point.
Okay. Board Member Belknap.
Chair, I actually just have a comment. I'm going to really appreciate the fact that staff is putting together something to work from. I think that's really important. Plus, they get the concept of exchanging what we have to trade out for something else without decimating certain programs and or our LEAs. So I appreciate the fact that we're going to have a working document to start with. So thank you, staff.
Okay.
Chair, Patty Norman has a hand raised.
Oh, go ahead. What's your comments? What did you say? Who's got their hands raised?
Patty Norman.
This is Deputy Superintendent.
Oh, there you go, Patty.
Yeah, and I was just saying,
I didn't see it.
It's okay. Staff can put together a template to show you some of the ways that we're asking our staff, different sections to put together their ideas. And we can maybe show you what those categories would look like, because that would help them in getting the information back together in an aggregate way. So we can put something together to send out if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there's Patty's. I finally found your hand. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments on this line item. I appreciate your work today and all the preparation that's gone into making this meeting happen. Hopefully our agenda can mostly focus on our education budget, and so we'll get that information out to you as soon as we can. And I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. So this meeting is adjourned, and we're back next week at 1 o'clock. So thank you.